everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today I'm going to be bringing you guys some brand new track reviews for some songs I happened to recently hear. You know the drill by this point, so I'll get right into things. But the first song I want to talk about today, this new track from Travis Scott, Highest in the Room. Overall, I like Travis Scott, but he does have a tendency, at least for me, to, on occasion drop some tracks that I don't find to be particularly interesting. And unfortunately, I feel like this song here is just another instance of that, really. The sound of this song fits in pretty nicely with the sound and vibe of a lot of the tracks off his last record, Astroworld, which, if you remember my review of that album, I thought it was a pretty average project, though I will say, recently the album has grown on me quite a bit. In fact, I think it's a pretty good album overall nowadays. Not a great project or anything, but it's pretty solid and enjoyable. But this new track here would definitely be among one of the weaker cuts on that album if it was included with that project. Nothing about this track really stands out as being particularly interesting. The instrumental to this thing is probably the best part of the track, but even still, it's just not that standout compared to some of the best production that Travis has used in the past. The lyrics and vocals here on this cut are just pretty standard for Travis. The structure of this thing is very, typical and average as well. The whole cut just kind of feels like an Astroworld B-side or leftover, and if it is, then it definitely, I guess, fits that mold pretty nicely, but it's just not a super exciting song, I guess is what I'm trying to say. If you really love Travis Scott, you really love everything that he does, I would say this track is worth checking out, I guess, but out of all the songs that he's dropped, this is not one of the more memorable ones, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's not a terrible track or anything, it's certainly listenable, but it's just really forgettable, like I said. Moving on, though, the next song I want to talk about is this new track from Clipping, Blood of the Fang. I like the two tracks that Clipping have already dropped for their upcoming record. I think that both of them are really solid, enjoyable songs. And with this new track here, I have to say that not only do I really enjoy this track, I have to say that it might be one of my favorite cuts that the group has dropped, really, just ever. I think this is a phenomenal cut. I love the really noisy production here on this track. I think it's Clipping doing this industrial, noisy style of instrumentation that they've always used at their best, really. I think that the vibe of this track, pulling together, again, the very Halloween-esque, typical horror movie style with, the social commentary that the group has typically tackled in their music, kind of pulling these things together here in this new track. It makes for a really interesting batch of lyrics that you get here on this cut, and the delivery of these lyrics here is fantastic too. I also really love the sample that's worked into this cut, which features that repeating blood sample over and over again throughout the track. I think it's really cool how that's used, the way it's blended together in with the rest of the lyrics of the song. It kind of carries that sort of older horror movie vibe too. It just pulls everything together into a really fantastic song, I feel. The delivery here on this thing, the instrumental, the lyrics, the sample, the hook to this thing, all of it is just fantastic in my opinion. Definitely going to be a highlight, I could tell, on this group's upcoming record. I'm excited for sure to hear that project given these last three tracks. And I can't recommend this track enough, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Go out there and listen to this thing if you have not done so already. Moving on, the next song I want to talk about is the newest track from Green Day, Fire Ready Aim. Like I said at previous points on this channel, I'm a pretty massive Green Day fan. They're one of my favorite bands ever, but if you saw my review of the lead single from the band's upcoming record, I didn't really care for that track too much. In fact, I thought it was pretty bad, and I was kind of scared coming into this new track too that it was also going to be pretty bad, and unfortunately, yeah, it's pretty bad once again. In fact, I might even go as far as to say that this new track here is even worse than the last track that they dropped. Just what to say about this track, really. There's so little to this thing. It almost feels unfinished in a sense. The instrumental to this track is bland as could be. The riffs here are really boring. The bass is pretty forgettable. The drums aren't really all that memorable either. The instrumental here is just bland, really, as could be. The vocal delivery here is a bit more energetic. I think it's a bit more memorable, but it still really isn't anything all that special. Lyrically, the track is pretty, forgettable as well. Nothing too descript here in the lyrics, nothing too stand out. it just kind of feels like they exist because they need to exist in the context of the song, not necessarily because they're saying anything or doing anything all that important, as they're not deep or insightful or funny or just interesting or creative in any sort of way. They just kind of exist here in this song. And the mixing on this track is awful as well, which isn't inherently a terrible thing, I guess, because, I mean, if you're going to be making a fast, to-the-point punk song, punk isn't really a genre that's known for its great mixing or anything, and it could oftentimes, work to the benefit of the track if it's very aggressive and in your face. But the way that the mixing is done here on this track isn't to this song's benefit, because what ends up happening here is that the instrumental is really loud and it drowns out the vocals here on this cut. As I explained before, the instrumental here is really bland and boring, whereas the vocals, while they're still not anything all that special, are the stronger of the two. And essentially what this track ends up doing is it makes the most boring aspect of the song the most prominent and in your face, which, yeah, just isn't a good thing to do with your song overall, I guess. Overall, yeah, I don't like this track at all. I really do hope that the rumors that this upcoming Green Day record is supposed to be like a troll album or something is true, because, yeah, like I said, this track and the previous one they dropped, just not good at all. Not going to be listening to this again until I have to review the album, I'll say that much. Moving on, the next track that I want to talk about is this new track from Harry Styles, Lights Up. While I was never a fan of One Direction in their prime, I guess you could say, I did enjoy Harry Styles' debut record back in 2017. Thought it was a pretty solid project overall. Not one of my favorites of that year necessarily or anything, but still a pretty enjoyable record, and I was interested to see what he was going to do coming off of that project. And this new single here that he's dropped, I think is pretty solid overall. I don't think it's like a fantastic song or anything like that, but it's pretty enjoyable for what it is. The sound of this thing is a lot less rock-focused than what was on his last effort, instead of being a bit poppier, but at the same time maybe a bit more soulful. I think that the lyrics here on this track are pretty solid too. I think his delivery on this cut is pretty nice as well. The only thing I'm not the biggest fan of here on this track is the instrumental. I think it's fine. It's a solid instrumental, I will say, but it's easily the least memorable aspect of this track as a whole. I do think that could have been a bit stronger, but really, I do think that this is a pretty decent cut. Again, not one of the best songs I've heard all year or anything, but still an enjoyable track, and I'm still really interested to see what Harry's going to be doing on his upcoming album, I guess, that should be coming out at some point in the future, because overall, this is a pretty solid track. Give it a listen. And finally, the last song I want to talk about here today is this new track from Swans, The Hanging Man. I'm pretty interested to see what Swans are going to be doing on their upcoming record, considering that the last single that they dropped before this one was a bit folkier, and I like when Swans do their kind of folky thing, so I really enjoyed that track, and I was expecting maybe for this upcoming record to be more in that style than what the band's been doing on their past few releases. However, with this new track here that they've recently dropped, the sound of this thing, I think, is a bit more reminiscent of those last three Swans releases. So, on the one hand, I'm kind of interested to see how this new full-length project is going to tie together all of these sounds, but at the same time, when it comes to just this track on its own, I think it's pretty enjoyable. Much like a lot of the cuts that popped up on the band's last few releases, this new track here runs a bit long with its runtime close to about 10 minutes in length, and a lot of the aspects of this track kind of have this droning, ongoing feel to them that was also present on some of the band's more previous releases. I like how off-kilter and kind of scary this instrumental sounds too. I think that the vocals that are paired up with it will even further help this very off-kilter, almost scary feel to them with how these lyrics are just delivered here on this track. And I love how the vocals here on this track can kind of go back and forth between some more restrained sounding vocals and something that's a bit more brash and aggressive and in your face. I think that the way this track is put together overall is just really solid. If I did have any complaints for this track, I do think that it runs maybe a bit longer than it needs to. I mean, I do feel like the core idea of this track could still be contained in a slightly shorter runtime. And, I mean, going forward into this next album of the band's, I'm kind of interested to see, as I mentioned before, how they're going to blend this sound together with some of the stuff they were doing on the last single that they dropped, because as I also said before, the sound of this new track here is a bit more reminiscent of what the band was doing on their last few releases. Not exactly the same, but definitely more so when compared to the first track that the band dropped a few weeks back from their upcoming record. And like I also said before, I kind of prefer the folkier sound the band was playing around with on that first single than the sound that they used on their previous few releases, as well as this track here. Not to say I dislike the sound or anything, but I was kind of interested to see a full album's worth of the sound that was present on the band's last single as opposed to this, maybe. But, you know, it's a bit too early to tell about that because the album isn't out yet and I haven't heard it, so I guess I'll have to wait a few weeks before I give my full thoughts on that. But yeah, that really covers up everything I want to talk about here today in this track review video. If you guys happen to have any opinions on these songs different than my own, that's perfectly fine. In fact, feel free to leave them in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, make sure you also leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more music-related content, album reviews, track reviews, things of that sort. If you enjoy that kind of content, make sure you subscribe. Thank you for watching once again, and stay golden.